fables and anecdotes. And these tend to be very short stories, and they tend to be stories that have a pretty clear lesson in them. And anecdotes, when you think about those, tend to be human stories, stories about our lives. And in our family, we recently, I have a 9-year-old daughter. When she was 7, she had braces, and then she had a retainer afterwards. And of course, all parents who've ever had children with retainers know the cardinal rule of having a retainer. You never, ever, ever wrap it in a napkin, not for any reason ever. And my wife and I each had our stories about retainers and napkins. In my wife's case, she had wrapped her retainer in a napkin and accidentally put it in the garbage can at school, and so she had to dig through a garbage can to find her retainer, and she did find it in the end. My event was a little more dramatic. I was camping and wrapped my retainer in a napkin, and then I got up from the table, and on this camping trip, people threw all their napkins into the fire to burn them up. So that was the end of my retainer. So we thought, okay, we'll share these stories with our daughter. She'll hear about this, and she'll be very careful not to break the cardinal rule of retainers. You know where this story's going, right? One day she came home and crying that she had forgotten and wrapped her retainer in a napkin, and of course it had gone into a dumpster somewhere and it was long gone. And so we thought about that for a minute. We thought, well, happened to us, and there's one of those processes. Now we have a younger daughter, and we know that our younger daughter at separate times will hear all 3 stories. Don't ever wrap your napkin in a retainer, or your retainer in a napkin, and see where that goes. So anecdotes are stories that happen to us. And of course there are 2 ways to learn in society. There's learning from our own experience, and there's learning from other people's experience. And generally speaking, it's easier to learn from other people's experience. We like to be able to do that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But so anecdotes are stories of things that happen to you, and these are often stories that parents use. At a different time, when my daughter was taking ballet classes, my wife told her a story about when you wear the tights that ballerinas wear, and talking about a time that she had sat on a bench at school and snagged her nylons or her tights, and it made a hole in her tights. And we noticed after that our daughter was really, really careful with her tights and not snagging them. And so these are the kind of stories that people naturally tell. We don't often think about them as being sort of big storytelling. It's not something that a performer on a stage would tell, but they're stories we often use and can hand down those sorts of lessons. A fable's a little bit different. A fable might have some of the same lessons in it. It's also going to be a short story with a really clear point to it, but these are stories that we've told as societies for thousands of years. At least 2,000, but chances are a whole lot older than that. As great as Aesop seems to have been in history as a storyteller, he probably didn't make up all the material that's credited to him. Chances are that he gathered up stories and passed them around, because these stories are cultural tools. They don't exactly have one author so much as lots of different authors that add to them. So let me give you an example of one of those Aesop's fables. A long time ago, there was an amazing mouse. Now, she didn't look all that amazing on the outside. She had that same little gray mousey. What's that stuff on the outside of a mouse? Fur, exactly. And those little tiny mousey, what are these? Ears, and that long mousey tail, just like all the other mice. Because she looked like the other mice on the outside. What made her amazing was on the inside. She would tell all of her friends, someday I'm going to do something amazing. And then ask her, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And she'd say, I don't know, but it's going to be amazing. And one day she woke up with a really good idea. How many of you have woken up with a really good idea in the morning? Anybody? Yeah, you know how that feels. You want to tell somebody right away or write it down, otherwise you might forget it. So she ran out to tell her friends right away, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to touch a lion. And all the other mouse friends looked at her and said, ooh, isn't that sort of dangerous? She said, of course it is. That's why no one's ever done it before. But I'm going to find a way to do it safely. So she went and got permission from her parents. Very important, kids always get permission. Then she went to the library and learned everything she could about lions. She learned 2 important facts about lions. The first one was, lions are really only dangerous when they're awake. They're not nearly as dangerous when they're sleeping. The other thing she learned was some lion geography. The dangerous part of a lion is the front end. It's where the eyes are and the teeth and the front claws. That tail is fairly safe. So she decided, I'm going to touch a lion on his tail when he's sleeping. So she had her plan. Very important to have plans, kids. Now you might think it's kind of hard to find a sleeping lion, but in the Serengeti in Africa, they say male lions sleep 20 hours a day in the summertime. So it wasn't that hard. Pretty soon, she could hear the snores of a lion. She began creeping up to that lion. She circled around to its tail end and was about to touch the tail when suddenly she had a really, really good idea. Hey, wait a minute, this lion's still asleep. He doesn't even know that I'm here. I can get closer. So she sneaked up some more to the back right paw. And she was about to touch that paw when she had a really good idea. Hey, wait a minute, this lion's still asleep. He doesn't even know that I'm here. I can get closer. So she sneaked right up to the front right paw. And was about to touch that paw when suddenly, you know what happened, right? She had a really good idea. Hey, wait a minute, the lion's still, what? Asleep. He doesn't even know that I'm here. I can get closer. And so she creeped right up to the lion's nose. Now, was that a good idea? No, but she was so excited she forgot about her plan. And suddenly the lion woke up. Roar! And he grabbed the mouse in his great big paw and said, what do you think you're doing? You were trying to touch my nose, weren't you? Nobody touches my nose. I should eat you for dinner. And the little mouse squeaked out as loudly as she could, please don't eat me. Please don't eat me. Please don't eat me. Why not? Said the lion. Well, because someday I might be able to help you. Yeah, that's what it is. I'll be able to help you someday. The lion just laughed. You help me? I'm a great big lion. You're a tiny little mouse. Now, who knows why the lion did what he did? Maybe it was because the mouse made him laugh. Maybe it was because his stomach was still full from a big dinner. Maybe it was because he didn't like the taste of mice anyway, but he said, okay, mouse, I'll let you go this time, but don't let it happen again. And Lion opened up his paw and Mouse scurried off through the grass to tell all of her friends that she had touched a lion. She left off the part about the lion catching her. That's the way stories are sometimes. Now, a few days later, that same lion was walking through the edge of the forest when he tripped over a rope and a great big net, plunk, fell right on top of him and tangled him up so much that he was trapped. And he roared in his loudest voice, "Let me out of here! Let me out of here!" But if you were walking at the edge of the forest and heard a lion roaring, would you go toward the lion? Not so much. Most of the animals ran away, except for the amazing mouse. Remembering her promise, she walked right up to that lion and said, "Hey there, Mr. Lion, remember me? A few days ago, you let me go and I said someday I'd be able to help you. Well, maybe that day's today. Do you need some help?" And the lion looked over at the mouse and said, "No, I'm rather comfortable in this net. It's very relaxing." Now, was the lion telling the truth? No. Maybe he was embarrassed. Sometimes when we're embarrassed, we might not exactly tell the truth. And Mouse knew that. So she sat down and said, "Well, if you don't need help now, maybe you'll need it later." When Lion realized there was no way he could get rid of that mouse, he said, "Well, since you're here anyway, why don't you chew on the net right by my nose here?" And the mouse scurried up and began chewing and chewing and pop, until the ropes broke. Until the hole was big enough and Lion could come right out of that net. And people say from that day to this, lions and mice are still the best of friends, all because of a mouse who kept a promise. And that's the end of the story. so there's an example of an Aesop's fable. Anybody know which one that is? The Lion and the Mouse, yeah. It's pretty clear from the story. But you're right, but that, you know, in the version that you often see in books, it's about a paragraph long. And so that's one that's been reworked. There's a backstory in it, there's a lot of other pieces. And often as storytellers, that's our job. We take stories that are written in books and we adjust them and get them ready for audiences today. And in a lot of cases, any book that was written, you know, before 1950 was written for a different culture. If you think about just in your lifetimes, you know, how much our society has changed in the last 50 or 60 years, books written in the 50s are very different from books written today. And the issues that people are dealing with are in some ways different. And so a lot of the job of a storyteller is keeping those stories relevant. Some of our folktale collections haven't been updated since the late 1800s. And so, you know, you go into a classroom today and talk about spinning wheels and spindles and you get these blank looks from students, because that's not something people are familiar with unless they've been to a historical reenactment site that had those items there. And so part of our job as storytellers is to update the stories in a couple of different ways. But one way is by explaining those answers. In the traditional version of the story, they never explain why a mouse would want to touch a lion. And so I figured that's probably a question I wanted to answer in my story and develop the story for that reason.